Hello everyone, it's Sylvia from Fairlight Tarot. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to have a look at very expensive tarot decks. As a matter of fact, I'm going to show you my most expensive tarot decks, and we're also going to have a look at pros and cons of having a tarot collection, and I'm going to give you my honest opinion about them. Let's have a look. So the first deck I'm going to show you is this one, the Baroque Bohemian Cats Tarot. This is I believe it is the first edition from 2004. This is a very famous deck published by Baba Studio. You probably know Baba Studio from the Bohemian Gothic or the Victoria Romantic Tarot deck or the Tarot of Prague, the Alice Tarot. They actually have a really fantastic collection, and every couple of years they reprint some of their decks. This one so far has not been reprinted, let's say, from the latest editions. I believe the last one was from 2014. However, there were rumors about the studio going to reprint this particular deck. And it's correct, but also incorrect in the sense that yes, they are going to reprint a cat-themed deck. However, it's not going to be the Baroque Bohemian Cats Tarot. It's going to be called the Bohemian Cats Theatre, and it's going to be slightly different. Also, this edition is very, very special because it shows the borders with these really elaborate and beautiful decorations. Now, I was very lucky to get this deck from a wonderful person that let me have it for a very reasonable price. However, and that sets the pace for the rest of the decks that I'm going to show you today. What I actually did a research on eBay, and I selected sold items. The reason why I selected sold items only, so all the listings that I got to see were only sold items, was because you can actually ask for $3,000 for a deck, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to sell it for that price. And also, just another couple of things. I live in Australia, so most of the times when I do a search on eBay, they will show me the results in Australian dollars. So when we're talking dollars, it's not US dollars, it's Australian dollars. Another disclaimer when we talk about these decks is that, let's say, 90% of these decks are out of print and hard to find, and that's the, let's say, the main reason why they sell for such high prices. However, there are a couple of decks in this video that are not out of print, at least not yet. But they are considerably expensive, and I just wanted to show them to you in order to be able to give you my honest opinion about them. So, this one, as you said, I actually keep it in a bag because the box is not in its pristine condition. But this deck it's an incredibly beautiful deck, obviously. But this is a video in which I'm going to give you a honest opinion about them, because I believe that, especially if you're new to tarot or if you're new to collecting tarot, for example, in my case, I started reading tarot over 35 years ago, but I didn't start actually collecting until perhaps 3 decades ago. So it took me about 5-6 years to realize that I really like having tarot decks for the sake of having them, which is, you know, it brings you joy because you have this kind of collection, you can look at them, and it's something that is, I think it's a common trait to all collectors, whether it's tarot deck, you know, or anything else that you're collecting. There is a certain sense of pride in having also the most expensive item. Now, I really want to stretch the fact that I'm going to be completely honest and candid about my collection, my buying, my spending habits. I actually did not spend a lot of money, ironically, on these decks. There's probably one where I spent more than I would normally allow myself to do, but it was because I had a really strong motivation to do so. However, I also need to say that if it's something that puts you in a bit of a tight spot, if it's something that gives you anxiety, if you feel uncomfortable with the amount of money you're spending on any kind of collection, please reach out for help. Help is always available. I strongly believe that we need to be honest, first and foremost, with ourselves. And when we feel uncomfortable in doing something, we need to reach out. There's no time to be, ashamed or feel awkward. Absolutely, I know a lot of people that reached out for help in any country. I'm sure anywhere you live, there is just a click away or a phone call away the possibility to be supported. So the reason why I'm actually doing this video is not to trigger some kind of anxiety related to spending habits, is absolutely far from it. It's just that, as I said at the beginning, I really want to be able to give you an honest opinion about, why do these decks sell for thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars? Are they really worth it, yes or no? So I did a search on eBay, as I was mentioning, for sold items on this particular edition. I couldn't find any. Sometimes, they only show you recent results, and in the last at least 12 months, I could only find, for example, people selling the bags, or perhaps just selling the book, or lots and lots of people selling more recent editions of this deck. But this particular edition from 2004, I haven't seen it sold. I have, however, seen people asking for $1,200, $1,400 Australian. Please remember that. That doesn't mean that they're going to sell, of course. However, it is by all means an expensive deck. Now, is it worth it? Let's have a look at the deck first. So it's a really beautiful deck. Let's say the art is, I think, undeniably pleasing. Obviously, if it's not your jam, you wouldn't like it. And you have the right to have your own taste, of course. What I try to do when I'm collecting a deck, I'm trying to see, first of all, if the value is actually, it's good value. So is the product a good product or not? And when it comes to a tarot deck, you always have to be aware about the quality related to the cardstock. So when it comes to the cardstock, this is slightly thin, on the thinner side. It's a semi-gloss, so it's kind of catching the light, but it's a really good one. It's a semi-gloss, so of course it does not reflect or mirror, for example, myself or the camera in any way. So it's actually giving a good feedback when taking photos or taking videos about it. It's not been gilded or edged. As you can see, this again is a tarot deck from 2004. The person who sold it to me has been using it, so it's not in pristine conditions. These are the backs. I actually really like this kind of backs. They're still reversible, even though there is writing on them, but they are reversible. And I can assure you that a 20-year-old deck that is still really in these good conditions, it testifies, it's a witness of the quality of the deck itself. I have heard a lot of people complaining that this edition, they have had this edition for years, and it becomes slightly borrowed with time. It really depends on humidity, depends on how you store it, it depends on when it was transported. It also depends on whether you bought this deck when it was sold and was still in stock, or whether it was acquired secondhand from someone else. There's a lot of reasons why a deck may become borrowed or warped. Mine isn't, and I do live in a very humid part of Sydney, Australia. It's also true that I haven't had it for a long time. It's only been a couple of months, so obviously we need to see, but I always make sure to store, especially when it comes to these decks that are very valuable, I always make sure to store them in the best possible condition in order not to damage them. Now, we've talked about obviously the deck. The only difference, this is a 79 cards deck, so it's got an additional card which is called Hermes, which is, I'm supposing, additional to the major arcana. When it comes to the box, I've shown you before, this is not a sturdy box. I know for a fact that the person that had it was storing it in the best conditions as well, and yet it's still kind of broke down at the bottom. To me, this speaks of, you know, it's just the quality that is lacking. However, what we can see is that it's got a perfectly, you know, pristine book. So, and even the spine is still intact, it has not been broken. It has been obviously looked through a few times. When it comes to the quality of the writing on the book, I have to say it's actually excellent. It's really excellent. We don't have color thumbprints, but it doesn't necessarily, you have the cards, we have the cards, so we don't necessarily need that. What I do like about it is that there is a description of the card, a cat's interpretation, because let's not forget that this is a cat themed deck. And so we talk about the cats, and I have 2 cats, so I can assure you that I agree with 90% of what is being written here about cat behavior. I do recognize my cats. I've had cats all my life, and dogs, so I'm an animal person. I don't take sides. I adore both animals. I know that it's very odd, but it is what it is. So we've got keywords and phrases. We got keywords and phrases for a reversed card, which is very interesting as well. And then we have a little bit of an explanation about the, let's say, the chord cards in this page, because this is the Page of Wands. But we also have the description of the suit, so the suit of wands, what's your chemical vibe and power of the suit. And we also have a little bit of a note, let's say, on the source material. Now it describes what type of cat is depicted on the card. So in this case it's a European brown tabby boy. And it tells you what's happening, tells you where this, let's say, scene has been taken from. So we're talking about Prague, for example, and the description. And it's at the end we also have a quote. So there is no more intrepid explorer than a kitten, which I agree 1000%, to the point that when I had kittens, I was always anxious all the time because I was really panicking. I'm an anxious kind of fur mom, so that's my nature. And then we have a little bit of a image, you know, of a statue also in Prague from the Urboska garden. Now, this is a really interesting book. I really like it. I think that quality-wise, it's great. It doesn't have a hardcover, it's a soft cover, but you know, it's still in excellent conditions, which again, you know, it tells you a lot about the quality of the deck itself. Now, this is the right, you know, moment for an honest opinion. So it sells for, I've seen it, you know, listed for 1,200 Australian dollars. I haven't seen it sold, but a research that I've done a couple of months ago when I first got the deck returned a result for a sold item for 700 Australian dollars. In any case, we can all agree, I think, that it's a very expensive deck. Is it worth it? And this is my honest opinion of a tarot collector for over 30 years, a tarot reader for over 35 years, and someone who's been living in many countries and had the opportunity to really go scavenging for decks. I wouldn't pay 700 Australian dollars for it. Would I pay the original price? Absolutely. So these decks, when they were sold by Baba Studio, and I have, for example, the latest one, which is, I just received it a couple of months ago, the Bohemian Gothic Tarot. I think for this one, together with the book, I paid, I could be wrong, okay, but I think I paid 168 Australian dollars for it. Would I paid 168 Australian dollars for this deck in this exact, so this edition with the ornaments on the borders and this book? Yes, I would. I also love Baba Studio. I think their decks are fantastic, and that definitely has a bit of a weight on my decision. Had I not known the publishers and the creators, I certainly would have to look at the walkthrough of the deck. Possibly I would have to, you know, go to someone who has it. I do know a lot of people who have extensive collection, much bigger than mine. I have around 450 decks, but I know people that have thousands of decks, so I would definitely go to these people and ask them to show me. if they're okay with that. I've done that a couple of times because I would want to know. But it's a beautiful deck. Would I buy it for that money if I didn't have cats? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I'm asking you, do you have cats, and do you think this is a cat themed deck? It is, obviously, because all of the protagonists are cats. However, there is something about a ick factor when you look at anthropomorphized animals, which is kind of a deal breaker for me. In this case, it wasn't. I don't know why. I think sometimes it hits me, sometimes it doesn't. It's a bit odd, but it is what it is again. In any case, this is my honest opinion. No, it's not worth 700 plus Australian dollars. Definitely not thousands. Is it worth 168 when it was sold? Yes, most definitely it is. Again, please accept this as my opinion. I am not an artist. I don't have an arts degree, so obviously this is based on, as I said, the quality of the product. I did work in the paper industry, so I do know how to recognize good cardstock when I see it. It's about, the book, it's about the cardstock, it's about the art style, it's a combination of things. Let's have a look at the next one. So the next deck is this one. This is very rare. It's the Grand Tarot Belin. This is not the Belin Oracle, because whenever I did a search on eBay, I mostly found the Belin Oracle, which is very, very affordable. I think it might even be mass market. This is the Grand Tarot Belin, and it's from 1984. This deck is, let's say, when I did the last search, it was selling for also 864 Australian dollars. It actually sold for that much. There are listings that ask for 1,500 Australian dollars. But again, as I said, it doesn't mean anything, because you can, if you want, you can list even, this ring, you can list it for $3,000. It doesn't mean that people will buy it. Now, let's have a look at it, but not, let's say, I'm always very, I feel like I shouldn't touch this deck too much because it is pristine. I never used it. I don't think I ever actually had a good proper look at this deck. What happens is that I was on a trip many years ago. I was on a trip to Belgium for work, and I was there with a colleague of mine, and he knew that I have this passion for collecting tarot decks. And he really, really, it was very grateful because thanks to me, he had got a really good deal on a business deal. So what happened was that he wanted to give me a present, and he found this deck in a bookstore, and without even inquiring, he just bought it. I think that back then he spent already, and I'm talking about 2000 and it may have been 2005. No, 2004. So, 20 years after this deck was released, and he already paid 180 euros for it. Now, I honestly, I feel like I should be wearing gloves because, ironically, this one is in pristine conditions, even though it's not mint in the sense that it has been open, as you can see. Now, when we look at the book, the guidebook, let's say, it is in French, obviously. So if you wanted and you don't speak French, you would have to use Google Translate, which is not a big deal because, to be honest with you, nowadays, these apps work really, really well. It does explain a little bit how to read the cards in general, and then it goes into details talking about the actual card. Now, this is a very unique kind of system. It's very, very interesting. And to be honest with you, there is a lot of that you can do, a lot of studies that you can do on the major arcanas. But if you look at the description, for example, of the minors, you'll see there's just a couple of keywords, and that's it. And it does tell you, though, how to read it as reversed, which is, I guess, better than nothing. But this is, let's say it's the fancy equivalent of the little white book that you can find in any mass market deck. Now this deck, as I said, I feel like I should be wearing gloves. I'm not, and it's kind of irresponsible of me because I am a collector. But this deck is never gonna leave my collection. It's first of all, it reminds me of the person, which unfortunately I haven't seen, you know, in a very long time. But it's also one of those decks that is so very peculiar, so very unique, that, you know, I wouldn't want to give it away and then finding that there's no other deck, at least for now, that can actually replace this. Now, a few things that I wanted to point out about this deck, because we are talking about, you know, an assessment whether it is worth it, what it's sold for. So it is gold gilded. It's the glossy kind of gold, and unfortunately, this is the original edition, so the corners are still square, so they're not being rounded. I'm not entirely sure, but I think there are later editions where the corners have been rounded. When it comes to the cards and the artwork, obviously it's very Marseille. So if you're not familiar with the Tarot of Marseille divination system, it looks at, you know, the major arcanas, but it also shows you the minor arcana as pips. These are beautiful pips, if I have to be honest, because you can go really lazy on pips sometimes. So these are not lazy, they're actually really beautiful pips. And then of course you have the court cards. So it's got a lot of information on the cards, I'm sure you've noticed already. So for the major arcanas, for example, you have a little bit of a sentence here, a message, let's say. You have a kind of a keywords for the reversed meaning. You have associations here. You have astrological associations here as well. Definitely interesting, definitely interesting. Now, but because we're talking about the deck and whether it's, I believe that it's worth it or not. Is it worth it? You know, the hundreds of dollars it's been selling for. Honestly, I think it is. Honestly, I think it is, because this deck was very unique. This deck was also from, you know, 1984. There have been a couple of reprints, I believe, in the 90s, but then after that, that was it. This deck has been printed in limited amounts, even though it's not, it doesn't say limited edition and it's not numbered. However, there weren't a lot of copies that have been printed back then. It is also your typical collectible item, in the sense that when it has been published in 1984, it was already considered a collectible item, and you can tell because of the box. So this is velvet. It's a clamshell box with a very shiny black cover and a gold foil, you know, for the name of the deck. And the ribbon inside. This is a 1984 deck. I repeat, it's just not what you would normally see in 1984. So the intention was to produce a collectible item. Now, because of the year, because of the product value, because of the very specificity of the market in which it has been released, so when you address a mass market, obviously it's a deck that can become valuable because it goes out of print. But this one was indeed intended to be a collectible item since the conception of the deck. So yes, I believe it's actually worth that much money. Not the actual product value, it's not $1,000 deck in material, of course, but we all know how collections work, we all know how collectible items, the procedure in which the collectible item is, you know, it needs to be authenticated, etc., etc. So obviously there's a few things that correspond to that kind of precious value that the deck has. So this is my honest opinion. Again, it's not about do I like the deck or not. My question for the other deck, the Baroque Bohemian Cats, was would I spend that much money to buy today? If I'm talking about a person that can afford to have a collection, not that I can. What I mean is a person that has the possibility, to buy this deck, to spend that amount of money without having any kind of financial difficulties. Would I buy? Yes, I would. I would probably buy it for that amount. Again, I am a collector, so of course it has that collectible item appeal to me. Let's move on to the next one. So the next deck is slightly more famous, I would say. It's the Bone, Stone and Earthflesh Tarot by Avalon Cameron. The artwork is by Anna Torian, and this is the indie edition. Now there's been talk about a mass market edition of this deck to come in 2024, possibly 2025, and it's going to be a mass market, but it's going to be slightly different from this edition, this indie edition. In so much as the guidebook is going to be smaller, and there's also going to be a few differences when it comes to the images on the cards. Now this one comes with an incredibly chunky and beautiful, I might say, guidebook. This is more like a book, a companion book, rather than a guidebook. And we've got black and white time prints inside. We've got a little bit of a description of the card, and we've got, for example, the reference to the names. So for each and every card, the King of Swords is, for example, King Arthur. The character of inspiration, King Arthur of Camelot. It's associated to a numerological meaning. To the Sephira, we also have the astrology associated with the card and the alchemical element of the card. We have a couple of keywords related to the essence, and then we have a little bit of description of the person depicted on the card. Then we hear about how to interpret the King of Swords in a reading as a person and reversed, and that's about it, I think, to remember. Now there's also a couple of journal prompts, which is always very much appreciated. Now this is a very chunky book, it's a very interesting book, and the amount of information you find on each and every card is astounding. As a collector, I can tell you that this definitely skews the valuation on a deck. When you have an incredibly exhaustive guidebook or companion book to a deck, definitely the value increases. Had this deck come with a little white book, it would not have been the same. Having said that, of course, it's one of the elements that we look into, not the only one. So obviously we talk about the box. Now I've shown you it's a 2-part box with a thumbprint cut on the sides in order to make it easier to open it. And there's a bit of a foam inside in order to be able to keep the cards from, mixing up inside the box. I believe that the newer mass market edition will not be presented this way, but it also depends on who the publisher will be, because I don't think I know if it's going to be picked up by US Games or Hay House. Probably US Games, knowing the excellent job that they're doing picking up indie decks, but I'm not entirely sure. Now the cards, okay, this is probably one of the most viewed decks, in the sense that it's been so talked about that everyone more or less have seen at least, a couple of walkthroughs of this deck. This is not in order because, believe it or not, I actually use this deck, even though it is very expensive. Now this deck has been listed by the creator, Avalon Cameron, who is, by the way, Australian and lives in Tasmania. She has listed this deck, let's say recently, because she still had some decks in stock, and she has been selling them for $444 US. Now please understand that normally when I refer to dollars in this video, I refer to Australian dollars. However, this creator has decided to list this deck with the amount in US dollars, even though she was selling from Tasmania, which is in Australia. Now $444, just to convert them into, with the current currency, into Australian dollars, we're looking at more or less 715 Australian dollars. I I'm going to be honest 1000% with you. I actually spent more than that because this deck came with a print by a sketch print by Anna Turian of the Chariot card. Now, I personally will buy anything Anna Turian produces because she is by far one of my top 3 illustrators of all times when it comes to pretty much anything. So not just illustrator but also artist. I absolutely love the way she creates the cards, and I'm talking about the way in which she acts as a conduit for the essence of the cards to be painted, a scene to be painted on the cards themselves. The meaning of the cards is absolutely spot on when it comes to the traditional RWS interpretation, but they are not translated into the traditional symbols. So let me repeat that and make it more clear. We understand that this is the Page of Swords because the Page of Swords is the archetype of the detective, the person who's always asking why. Why are things happening and how are they happening and why are they happening this way, and so on and so forth. It's the suit of the mind. So obviously we look at the person who is initiated into the court cards being a page. So it's the person who's obviously starting a journey and they want to know everything because they're very curious. This card would definitely give you that because of the books are open and is, you know, also moving these kind of magic air flow between his hands. There's feathers, there's all these symbology. There's wings, for example, because the books have wings and they take flight, and so they actually move into an evolution. It's a younger person. As we know, the pages normally refer to a younger person as well. There's everything that you need to know about the Page of Swords in specific. You find it here. Is it traditional? Has it the traditional symbols of the RWS? No. So it's still traditional meaning, not traditional symbols. And you can say that pretty much for any of these cards. I love the star card, by the way. Also not very traditional, but it's an interpretation of the star and the healing and the hope that are symbolic to this card that stems from within. So there is so much to say about this deck because, as I said, Anna is my favorite illustrators. And this is the Chariot. So obviously I accepted to pay a little bit more than the retail price for this deck because of the sketch by Anna, which I also gave away as a giveaway, you know, for my channel when I hit 1,000 subscribers. So that was actually a kind of act of love because I love Anna's illustrations so much. Now, this deck is an incredibly good cardstock. So it's the kind of matte, sturdy cardstock with a really silky feel to the top card. These are the backs, by the way. They are reversible as well, and the deck is gilded in red, but I have to say this is the only flaw that I tend to see in every single copy of this deck. It tends to chip, especially at the corners. I don't know if I can show you. I probably can if I do that. You see that these are actually chipped. So I can assure you 1000% that yes, I do use this deck. However, I don't use it very often, and I'm also extremely careful. When I use it, I don't refill shuffle it. I don't wash and shuffle it at all. So this is only being overhand shuffled. And I can assure you that this is very common to pretty much any copy that I've seen of this deck. And it's also, unfortunately, it's because of this particular color. I do tend to see this color, so this kind of red gilding, to be particularly prone to be chipped, unfortunately, on other decks as well. I don't know why the gold gilding is more durable than the red one. It might have to do with the particular dye of the inks, but I'm not entirely sure. Now, it's time for my honest opinion. If I had to buy it again, would I spend 700 and something Australian dollars on it? Probably not. Probably not. The reason is that, first of all, because it is official now that it will be picked up. It has been already picked up, but it will be released mass market in the next, say, I don't know, 12 to 16 to 18 months. And that unfortunately has a bit of a negative effect on the value of the deck. There's also a couple of things that if you're part of the tarot community, you will know related to this deck and the creator, not the illustrator, but the creator of the deck. I'm not going to repeat that because I was not witnessing them firsthand, but I've heard a lot of people, specifically saying that they wouldn't spend that much money on this deck for that specific reason. And obviously, if you're a tarot collector, let me tell you, collectors are always weird. Okay, and tarot collectors are no different from any other kind of collectors. We are a bit odd. We are a bit odd and eccentric because we are collecting tarot decks. But it brings us so much joy and so much enjoyment that I'm very, very happy to be collecting tarot decks. I also collect fountain pens. And I can tell you, collecting fountain pens doesn't give me the same sense of thrill whenever I seek out a deck that is out of print and hard to find. Whenever I do find it and perhaps it's a price that I can afford, and the anticipation of waiting for it to come to you in the mail, it's just that kind of feeling. It's very, very powerful, and it's part of the joys of being a collector. Having said that, again, going back to my honest opinion, no, I would not spend, $444 on it. Originally, this was a Kickstarter and it didn't sell for $444. I believe that it was priced at $85 originally from the Kickstarter from 2020. Would I spend even $100? Absolutely, even more. I would say I would probably spend up to $150. If it came with a print, even more, because yes, it is a fantastic deck. It's absolutely gorgeous. The artwork is fantastic, phenomenal. I could not find any other adjective and superlatives to describe how good this deck looks. So obviously, if you don't have it, you have to either familiarize yourself with it, or perhaps when it comes out mass market, you might want to reach out and buy it, because mass market decks are supposed to be obviously more affordable. Even though I have to say, Anna Tourian also illustrated the Le Tarot Arthurien, which is by Claire Duval, which is a mass market deck. It's a French mass market deck. It is available on Amazon France, and I believe you can also get it if your Amazon US, for example, gets Prime free delivery from Amazon France, then let's go for it. But it does, for example, I spent 95 Australian dollars on it, which is probably one of my most expensive mass market decks. The Fyodor Pavlov by US Games mass market is also rather expensive. So you do have some rather expensive mass market decks, but they tend to be way more affordable than expensive indie decks. And the next deck is another deck by Baba Studio, so the Bohemian Gothic Tarot. This is the 3rd edition that comes in a clamshell box, and it's a really beautiful deck. These are the backs. I know that there's been a few different editions, so sometimes people want to see the backs because they can recognize the edition from the backs, or whether there was an additional card or not. In this case, I do have an additional Lovers card. This deck came originally with a larger companion book like the ones that we've seen for the Baroque Bohemian Cats. However, I purchased this deck secondhand, and the person that sold it to me did not have the larger guidebook. What happened was that I also ended up getting, as I've shown you before, the latest edition of the Bohemian Gothic Tarot, and in that case I also bought the larger companion book. So I'm quite happy, to keep that one that I can use, even though it might be slightly different. I have no idea whether they actually reprinted the original guidebook or if they kind of changed some things. Now I have to say, this edition is actually let's say favor this edition to the newer one, because the newer one has, I'm just going to briefly show you, the newer one has foil, cold press foil, printing, and even though it is by far a much better job than the fourth edition of the Victorian Romantic, which unfortunately had a lot of, let's say, issues with the cold stamping. There was not much detail in the cold stamping. This one has plenty of detail. I'm trying my best to show you. Now this is a skeleton with wings. Let me just see if I put it closer. So now it's difficult to show, but in any case, when I do like this with the light, you can see that there's a lot of details here in the cold press stamping. Now, the reason why I actually prefer this edition to this one is because of the cold stamping. I feel that even though there's a massive improvement from the Victorian Romantic, in the Victorian Romantic, for example, you wouldn't have been able to see the details in the gown of the Empress at all. It would have been like a blob of color. But I still think that there's a lot that can be improved in this case. For example, I don't know whether it's related to time. Again, I stored this deck in the best possible conditions, but I really don't know if I can show you, because it's all about catching the right light and on the right angle in order to be able to show you. But what happened was that in all of the clouds, so in each and every card of these that have clouds, for example, the cold stamping is actually kind of pixelating. I wouldn't know how to find a better word for it. It's not actual pixels. We're not talking about digital art, that's not what I'm implying. However, there is a kind of a reaction, and I honestly don't remember whether it was like this when it was delivered or not. It may have been a reaction to time, for example, if the inks were not completely dry. As I said, I have been working 9 years in the paper and printing industry, and that's called, well, there's definitely a lot of technical names for that, but there's a lot of migration of the inks into the surface of the card, whether, you know, through the top coat when the inks have not entirely dried up yet. I'm not implying at all that that's what happened, but I do see that every single time there is a cloud, or let's say an element which is similar to a cloud, like for example these gargoyles here, but again it's gonna be very difficult to show you, so you're probably thinking I'm being too picky. However, I am a collector, and one of the things that collectors do is also evaluating these kind of things. You can probably see it a little bit more in this. So it really shows when you're doing like this and you're trying and catch the light in here. So these were originally, when I got the deck, my impression was that it was a very good attention to detail and a very good result with the cold stamping. However, now, I repeat, I don't know whether it's something that has happened recently or not, but these look really pixelated. And it's a pity because obviously you can't really see it on camera, but I can assure you that when you look at it, you see it immediately. And unfortunately, that's what happens when you notice a flaw. For example, you tend to, you tend to look at the flaw every time you see the card. It is an incredibly beautiful deck, and perhaps I am being a little bit picky in the sense that I wouldn't have paid attention to this deck had it been a mass market deck. But it's not a mass market deck, and Baba Studio is one of those printer studios that really pay a lot of attention to what they're doing. And so, it's worth it to just have a very unbiased, friendly, communicative talk with them about that, because what happens with the Victoria Romantic was that a lot of people just bought the deck and just rehomed it because they just really didn't like the blobs of colors. And now that we moved, it's definitely an improvement with the new edition of the Bohemian Gothic. But I feel that we still need to, we would love to see something even more detailed without, the pixelation, for example. Now, this one is my favorite edition because of that, because it does not have any stamping on the cards. And it's also slightly bluer in tint. I know that they did a little bit of tweaking on the tint for the new edition. I love this deck, regardless of what I'm saying now. I'm just telling you from the point of view of a collector, so from the point of view of a person that actually invests money on these kind of decks, and I'm switching to just someone who loves tarot. And I can assure you 100% that this deck is absolutely gorgeous. And the reason why I'm saying this is not just because of the art style, which is fantastic. And obviously, you know, to each their own. So if you don't like this kind of art style, of course you wouldn't like the deck. However, I have to say this is a very beautiful deck with very dark vibes, but also very whimsical. There is a character, there is a personality to the cards, and when you use it, you'll definitely feel it. It's one of those very rare decks that gives you this kind of feedback. When you play with the cards, there is an engagement with the characters. There's a way in which the characters look at you by breaking the fourth wall. I don't know if you can see in this case, for example. The character on the Nine of Pentacles is looking at you, breaking the fourth wall and just showing you the falcon. And that is the smirk on their face, the kind of half smile, the way in which the eyes are sort of, the head is tilting downwards, but the eyes are looking up. So there is a little bit of, it's almost as if it were a bit of a spooky kind of expression in her face. But it's there in you. It's there in you as a reader to look at the card and get engaged in the meaning of that card in specific. So I love when a tarot deck gives me the possibility to do that. It's an absolute thrill to use. So I really, really enjoy using this deck. Let me just be completely honest. Would I buy this? Again, now I have to disclose that I actually paid a fair bit of money on this one. I got it from a person that was selling it secondhand, but it was pristine. I think I spent something around 350 Australian dollars. I remember now, because obviously I had to pay for shipping as well. Would I spend the same amount on it again? Again, I'm always talking from the point of view of a person that can afford to have a collection. So from the collector's point of view, you look at them as if they were investments. Would I spend the same amount of money, 350 Australian dollars? Probably not. Would I spend the original amount of money that was asked when they released this deck? Obviously adjusted, because this one was released in 2013, so obviously we need to adjust it to 2024. So let's say it's probably around that mark at 170, 180 Australian dollars. Yes, definitely, absolutely, without even thinking twice about it, because this deck is not just beautiful, it's not just a collectible item, but it's a fantastic tarot. And the next deck is the Yokai Yochi Tarot by Bubba Plague. Now this deck, I actually didn't pay for it. So what happened was that this was the result of a trade. And I always had the impression that I was getting a lot more than what I was trading it for. But, you know, it always depends on what the value for you is of a deck in specific. This is an incredibly beautiful deck. Now, if you're not familiar with this deck, it is based yokai. The word yokai means spirit, supernatural spirit in Japanese, and it's referring indeed to the creatures that populate the myths and legends of Japan, which are very, very interesting. Now, the product quality, let's talk about that. So it comes with a two-part box with a really beautiful, almost velvety kind of feel to that. There's this gold foil on the top and the sides and the back as well. And inside, there's an image inside as well. Very luxurious. It feels like a really high quality deck. When it comes to the quality of the little white book, it's also very silky to the touch, very nice. And then unfortunately it goes down here from that. So as you can see, it's a very kind of a disappointing little white book. At first, at least, that's what, you know, my opinion was when I first looked at it as soon as I got the deck. And then I started actually reading about the cards, and I think that it's actually quite good. Because what happened was that because of the economy of the production, let's say, they never had the will to produce a larger companion guidebook, so they always knew that it was going to be a rather small little white book. So because of the, let's say, limited real estate that I had, the creator chose to focus on the actual yokai. So for each and every card, we've got a yokai, so a spirit, let's say a supernatural being that is depicted in the cards. Obviously, there's a lot of research that has been done behind these decks. I myself have studied Japanese for years, and I am in love with the Japanese culture, and in specific, I absolutely adore studying myths and legends, and I am very familiar with yokai, yurei, kami, and I'm also very familiar with the various representations and all of the legends that are related to these yokai, and I have a lot of books about them. I can assure you 100% that this is perfectly accurate. Not just that, but because the creator knew that they only had like one sentence, okay, just one sentence for each and every one of the cards, they obviously had to choose what kind of information to give about this yokai. So I think that they've done an excellent job, because there's obviously the number, the title in English, because you want that, of course. Then there's the writing in Japanese, in particular kanji and hiragana. Then we've got the romaji. So the romaji is the transliteration into Roman alphabet of the kanjis and hiragana. So the full, for example, is the shiro ukari, and then in one sentence, or perhaps two, but in any case not more than 2 to 3 lines per card, you actually have a really good, accurate description of the essence of this yokai. So the shiro ukari is a white ghost-like spirit. Not much is known about it. Simple and innocent looking. Of course, this one is very specific. You don't have a lot of literature related to this yokai, but if you go to the tanuki, I'm sure that everyone knows that, because it's really whimsical. It's also a little bit dirty. There's a lot of really kind of naughty descriptions of this particular yokai in many lullabies, for example, that children used to sing. And it says, you know, it's the magician, it's mischievous, shape-shifting raccoon dog, likes to play tricks on humans, and has various supernatural abilities. Obviously, if you're interested, you will have enough of information to decide whether you want to go down the rabbit hole and know more about this particular yokai or not. I think that it's a definitely interesting and enticing first step to introduce these spirits, you know, to the tarot world and the tarot community. So even though at the beginning I was a little bit disappointed, because I would have loved to have a bigger companion book, after all, I don't mind, because it's actually quite accurate. So these are the bags, and they're very beautiful, reversible as well, as you can see. It has been gold gilded, but this is really high quality gold. It's a glossy gold, but it's one of those satin gloss, in the sense that it's not chipping very easily. And also, if you're familiar with this type of gold gilding, this one is not sharp in such a way that it's actually scratching on your skin of your fingers when you shuffle and use the deck. The top coat is a very soft linen. In any case, it's a very sturdy card. This one is, it wouldn't feel like a collectible item, in the sense that it's not fancy, it's not fragile at all. This is a deck that can be used, and I think it has been designed to be used. Even though there is a gold gilding, but nowadays, you know, because this is a production from, I believe, 2021 or 2020. Let me just double check if I can find It was originally a Kickstarter. I believe it's 21, but I don't want to, well, I can't find it here. 2021, there you go. So obviously as I said at the beginning, I actually did not pay for this because I got it in a trade, and I will always believe that I was very lucky, because what I was trading it for is nowadays still very valuable, not as valuable as this deck, and I received this deck and another 2 decks together, for a trade for what I was giving away. So I really believe that, but this person really wanted the deck that I was trading, so we were both really happy. Now, when it comes to the color palette, as you can see, it's a very muted color palette. The art style is very whimsical, but it's very respectful of the tradition of the Japanese ukiyo-e, for example, the woodblock printing. It recalls, if you're imagining, if you've been to Japan or if you're familiar with the Japanese printing, you will see that, it's very respectful of that kind of art style. And the cards are, all of them, they're so very funny, they're whimsical, the characters are interesting. There's a lot to talk about each and every one of these cards, the Kitsune, for example, because of course you have myths and legends related to that. And it's a fascinating world. Let me tell you, it's a fascinating, really fascinating world. It has been part of a lot of movie productions. For example, there's been plenty of movies with supernatural beings from Japan. Even, for example, if you're a fan of the actual TV show Supernatural, there's a couple of yokai that actually appear on a couple of episodes. And I am really glad that I have this deck. I love this so much that I've actually posted a video on the research that I've done for each and every one of the yokai in the major arcana. So for each and every one of these ones, I've actually described the story, the name, where they come from, where they're located, because there's a lot of geographical diversity in the origin stories of these yokai, and that's even more interesting. It just adds up to the layers of depth in which you can actually see these cards once you get this deck. Now, talking about the price. Now, this deck can sell for, honestly, it's always very difficult to pinpoint, but it can sell for up to 400 or 500 Australian dollars, and I'm referring to the latest price. It has been sold for in a Facebook group, which sometimes is actually even more reliable than eBay, if you ask me. But of course, it really varies. What happened was that I saw the creator, so Booba Plague, actually posted a few months ago that they were going to sell the remaining decks that they still had in stock for a very reasonable price. However, there were a few problems with shipping. It was during the pandemic. The first shipping was during the pandemic, so obviously there were no flights coming into Australia. Australia was completely closed off to the rest of the world, so we didn't even have flights, actual planes, cargo planes coming in. We had, we were missing normal day-to-day items that were just missing from the supermarkets, and that was the stuff that everyone noticed. But obviously when you're a collector, these kind of things, you notice them even more. Not that it was important back then, of course there were more pressing issues. But I remember there were a lot of collectors I know from Australia that reached out to the creator begging for a DHL shipment. USPS wasn't flying to Australia for months. So the creator Dara refused, and I understand that, even though they could have probably found a better way to express what they were saying. What happened was that obviously you had to take into account disruption. Even when pay for a DHL, there was a lot of possibilities that they were operating with half the personnel that they used to have, and perhaps someone that did not really have a lot of experience. So I've had a lot of people saying to me that they bought decks from the US and they were never delivered. Many of these things happened, of course. it is what it is again. But I remember the last time that she made them available on the website, she still, even though USPS has started shipping to Australia for at least a year and a half, it was still a lot of problems shipping to Australia. So I know that there are a lot of people that have, in my case, for example, I have a parcel collect service in Oregon. So that is not a big deal for me. I just pay double in shipping, but so be it. However, I have to say it's a bit all over the place in the sense that it is really sought after. But then when the creator comes out and says, I've got 30 decks, available, and obviously they price them with the original price or even slightly inflated price. In this case, I'm not entirely sure, but I think that she was selling them for 120 Australian dollars. Obviously, it puts a dent into, the collectible item that you want to sell for 500, and you wouldn't be able to do that because you have a new copy for 120. Having said that, that is just a marginal kind of comment in the sense that we're not here for that. And what I want to talk about in this video, and the reason why I filmed this video and I'm posting it, is because I have the feeling that there's a lot of talk about sustainability when it comes to tarot. What happens is that in the last 5 years, especially in the last 3 or 4 years during the pandemic, there has been a lot of like a massive increase in production of independently produced decks. And there's a lot of creators that really reach a very high price point. And there's been a lot of talk about whether that's worth it or not. So that was the trigger for me to show you, to film this video. So my honest opinion about all of them is also taking that into consideration. Now, would I, let's say, spend $500 on this? Absolutely not. Would I spend, the $200-300 that it seems to be selling for? Probably yes, but that's very personal because I have an incredible passion for Japan. This is probably one of my most cherished decks when it comes to, not particularly to the art style, because it's very simple, but to the theme of the deck. Japan is just very fascinating for me. Its culture, it's something that I've been interested in ever since I was a little girl, and I am stoked to have this deck in my collection. If I didn't have it, I would definitely pay up to $250 Australian for this deck. Now I'm going to show you the deck I've actually traded for this one because I had 2 copies. So the second copy I traded for this deck, and that deck is this one, and it's the Healing Waves Tarot. Now this deck has a bit of a history in the sense that it was, I think it was an Indiegogo campaign. I missed out on the Indiegogo campaign by about 2 days. I kid you not. I was out of about 2 days only. And I kicked myself, and it was during the pandemic as well. And it was a really difficult period of time for me. I was in a bit of a Six of Swords situation. If you know what it means, you know what it means. And I saw this deck and on one of the many channels that were, talking about it, and I forgot which one. And as soon as I heard, so I used to live on the beach, basically throughout the whole pandemic. I was very lucky because I used to live on the beach. Now I don't anymore. We just recently moved. But back then I was, and the sea and the ocean had a very strong meaning for me. And when I heard that these cards are basically watercolors, and the creator, who's Thai, by the way, and I absolutely love Thailand. If you watch my channel, you would have seen my tarot on tour episodes from Thailand, Bangkok and Chiang Mai in specific, where I just go around and show you the various shops that sell decks, but I also talk to the locals, and I found a witch cafe in Bangkok, for example, so I interviewed the owner. So when I heard that the creator, the illustrator, had used seawater to activate the color and the watercolors, I just I really convinced myself that I wanted this deck, even though I had seen only a few of these cards. And then obviously so I missed out on the Indiegogo, so I had to buy it from one of the resellers on Etsy. But it was already a high price. It was already at 210 Australian dollars. I don't regret having spent that much money on this deck. It is now out of print. The same creator has actually produced another couple of decks. One is called the Wild Child Oracle and another one is the Wild Child Tarot. The art style is always very recognizable because it's very similar to this, the color palette and everything, but they are not based on the ocean, and I really needed a deck that was based on the ocean. As you can see, this is very much in that kind of thematics. I love whales. So let's talk about the product value. So it comes with a two-part box with a very silky feel to it, printed inside as well. It comes with a PDF guidebook, which is actually quite interesting. I printed out a copy. I don't know where it went. When it comes to the cardstock though, I have to say this is one of those older kind of rose petal finishes, which means that the cards are very sticky. You cannot really fan out this deck. However, once you use this deck on a regular basis, it does smoothen out the top coat in such a way that it becomes a lot easier to shuffle and to fan. I don't use this deck very much because I used to have 3 copies of it. I traded one for the Yokai Yochi and another couple of decks, and I rehomed the other copy. So this is the one that I have left, and to be honest with you, I don't want to ruin it. So my cards are still pretty much pristine and they do stick together, which I don't mind, because when you don't use it, if you don't use it, you don't use it. I mean, it's something that obviously it is part of being a collector. When you're just looking at, in the specific case of tarot, you're looking at the cards, you're looking at the decks, but you're not using it for a reading. I know a lot of collectors that don't even read tarot. There is a famous in the tarot community, Australian collector. She has something like 1,500 decks. She doesn't know how to read tarot, which is perfectly fine, because her motivation comes from the collection and the art style that she loves so much. Now this deck, I don't know, to be honest with you, what it sells for now. But it's never sold for anything less than 250, 280 Australian dollars. I think it went up to 400. Would I spend 250, 280? No. Would I pay again whatever I paid for it? Was around $210? Probably yes. But there is something to be said about it. So what happened was this. By the way, it's got a really beautiful indigo looking, indigo color edging. What happened was that when this deck was produced, it was very clear since the beginning that Navanjana Siri, which is the creator, really pointed out they would not have reprinted this deck. So there was one print and that was it. No other prints. And truth be told, 90% of creators who said that, they actually end up reprinting. It's happened so many times and now I don't believe them anymore. And it makes sense from a business point of view. It's obviously profitable for them, so why not? Why wouldn't they reprint? And they also make a lot of people happy, right? Because you get the possibility to get a new print. However, this didn't happen for this deck. There were a couple of resellers on Etsy that had a few decks in stock and they released them in batches. So obviously you had the possibility to get your copy once every 6 months. I know that it has been printed in French. It has been, let's say, it's a different kind of edition because it's got a different kind of cardstock. It's kind of glossy. I don't have it, so I'm just talking out of what I've seen on social media platforms. And it has white borders and obviously French titles. I don't know whether that's worth it or not, but for example, it sells now on Etsy for 267 Australian dollars. I honestly would not, having this one, I wouldn't spend 267 on the French edition. Only I would consider it if it were less expensive, but also if someone could really tell me what the cardstock is like, because it looks glossy, but I'm not entirely sure. Now, there's something else to be said about this deck. What happened was that when we knew that Genacity was not going to reprint it, obviously it went up in price. However, there was almost immediately after that, there was the release of the Wild Child Oracle that looked pretty much like this tarot deck. And then after the Wild Child Oracle, which was very popular, there was also the release of the Wild Child Tarot, which looks very similar. It's just, as I said, thematically different, but the art style is exactly the same. I think that this has influenced my opinion on this deck. So I'm happy that I got it. I'm really happy that I got 3 copies because thanks to this I got the Yokai Yochi on a trade, so I'm really happy. But had I known that there would have been another couple of decks which are very similar immediately afterwards, and they're still available, by the way, on, for example, the Tevada store, I'm pretty sure. I don't know if I would have spent, I probably would not have spent $260, $270. Probably the price mark of 180 would have been okay, knowing that it was going out of print. Had it not gone out of print, I definitely would not have paid that much money. So I feel that I need to say these things because it's a bit of a justification on, what the mentality of a collector, let's say. I'm just literally showing you what the practices of a collectors are. Obviously, if you're not a collector, this is something that it probably doesn't sit well with you. If you're not collecting anything, then it's a bit of a quirky mindset. I understand that. I agree to that and I accept it. And I know that there'll be, lots of people saying that they would never spend that much money on a deck. I completely agree. I, for example, know a lot of people collecting coins. For example, my dad used to collect coins, and he was sometimes spending quite a fair amount of money on coins, and I wouldn't because I'm not collecting them. And somehow, even though I can bond, I was able to bond with my dad because we had that collectible kind of spirit, even though we were collecting different items. I secretly judged him because I just couldn't believe that he would have spent that much money on a coin. So it's, I invite you to be kind and understanding. It's just a way in which we just enjoy our habits. There's, people collecting all sorts of things. I mean, I also collect fridge magnets. Obviously, they're incredibly cheap. And my one thing is that it needs to be a really dodgy looking fridge magnet. One, you will be ashamed to show your grandma. So if that passes the grandma test, then it goes on my fridge. If it doesn't, if it's too pretty or too plain, then it doesn't go on the fridge. So my husband and I travel the world and we just literally just collect fridge magnets from all of the countries and places we've been to, but they're all really dodgy. Like sometimes I have people, coming to visit for whatever reason and then just staring blank face at the fridge because they just go through all of the fridge magnets and wondering what the heck is wrong with me, which is, it's absolutely fine. Let's have a look at the other decks that I've got. So the next deck is a very famous deck, it's the Saki Saki Tarot. Mind you, this is the original 2004 edition of the Saki Saki deck, not the more recent edition from 2023, which is called I Am the Artist deck, which was created by Monica Cleosaki, so the same artist behind the Saki Saki Tarot. However, it does have a few differences. Now let me show you this one. This one unfortunately came without the box. So I'm definitely being extremely careful how I use it, but I have to be honest with you, it's actually kind of sturdy. So it comes with, originally had a larger companion book, which I don't have. This one does, however, have a really good, if I may say, little white book because it's got a lot of references to astrological associations of the cards and so on. It is a really whimsical deck. Now this deck is probably famous because the characters, let's say part of the cards, not all of them, in the deck are missing their heads. So what happened was that we, there is it was the talk of a moment, this deck, for many years. You can imagine if it was released in 2004, obviously there's been a lot of collectors that have this deck in their collections. I originally didn't have it. These are the backs, by the way. I didn't have it, and what happened was that I found someone who did in Canada. I reached out to them through a Facebook group, and they didn't want to sell it. They wanted to trade for about, it was a very special kind of trade, so they were asking for 5 different decks, either mass market or affordable indie decks. And so we agreed on a list. And to be honest with you, it was very easy for me because ironically all of those decks were actually printed in the US, so I didn't even have to get them delivered to me. I bought them online, and I got them delivered directly to this person in Canada. And the moment in which she had received all 5 of them, then she sent this one back to me. I have to say that this one, the last price that I saw it selling for was $300 without the companion book. I did not spend $300 Australian by buying those 5 decks. I think I spent something around $210, $220 because, as I said, they were very affordable decks. And I'm quite happy because even now, and I know that I'm giving a bit of a spoiler away, but if I ask myself now, would I again do the same thing? I actually prefer that kind of trade rather than paying the money outright. It feels almost as if you're engaging a little bit more with the person you're trading with. We had this conversation going on for a couple of months because a few decks took a few weeks to get to her, and our agreement was that she wouldn't have sent out this deck until she had received all 5 of them. So I was in touch with her a few times, and we had a really nice rapport and conversation, and we talked about this deck, and she told me a lot of stories, so I got to know a little bit of her background, which was very nice. And always in the tarot community, whenever I find a way to bond with another tarot collector, is always a really rewarding experience. So at the end of the day, it felt almost as if I was gifting her those decks, and she was gifting this deck back to me. So I would definitely be very happy to do this kind of trade again. Not with this deck. This deck is safe in my collection. It's not going anywhere. I absolutely love it. What happened was that when Monica reprinted this deck last year, or about a year and a half ago, she actually changed it. She changed the cardstock, which, by the way, talking about the cardstock, so very sturdy, very silky to the touch. It reminds me a little bit of a papery version of the US games from the 80s. So really not as buttery as that cardstock, which is just phenomenal. And it's the same cardstock, the feel to it is the same cardstock as this Somnia Tarot. If you have the Somnia Tarot and you go like this with your fingers, you will have the same feeling, tactile feeling, that the US Games decks from the 80s used to have. Now, US Games has changed well, pretty much everything when it comes to the production value. So you don't have that anymore. But as I was saying, so she put back the heads on the characters that didn't have a head. And you know what? The result is that I don't like it as much. I don't know why. I don't know whether it's because I got so used to this deck and the characters without the heads, or because the fact that I didn't have the heads, they gave me the possibility to imagine everything that I wanted. So it's like a blank page in which you can write your own story. Or for whatever other reason, I honestly don't know, but I'm not the only one. I've heard from a lot of other collectors in the tarot community that they say exactly the same thing. So ironically, what we thought was the weird thing about this deck is actually the thing that was the kind of, the one characteristic that sets it apart from other decks, which, the new one doesn't have anymore. So we're a bit over halfway through. I do still have another couple of decks, and let's have a look at the next one. So the next one is the Honasa House. This is the Jumbo Edition, so number 6. If you're familiar with Honasa's decks, She publishes every couple of years, she publishes a new edition, and in many cases, like the 5th edition was completely different in tone, in tint, and in size. It was more like a oracle size deck. This is the jumbo edition, just to show you the difference with with another deck, which is more standard. For example, the Sakisaki. Okay, so as you can see, it's wider and a lot taller, like at least 70% taller than a... this is not exactly a standard deck when it comes to width, but it is a standard height. So this deck, okay, another very lucky trade, not even a trade, sorry, I actually purchased this deck. I'm almost ashamed of saying what I spent for it, but I have to say, because I've been honest throughout the whole video and it wouldn't make sense to just start hiding things now. So I only spent $25 US for it. I bought it together with the 3rd edition, also for $25. So I spent $50 US for 2 decks that are incredibly valuable from Honasa House, out of print, hard to find. This one, the jumbo, is particularly hard to find because of the jumbo size, and because when she actually released the 6th edition, she had 3 different formats: a mini, a normal size, and a jumbo. And I think that almost everyone got the jumbo. And if you have it, you're not gonna want to part way with it, because it's just absolutely incredible. The size of the cards lets you pick a lot more and find a lot more details in the card, which is what makes this deck unique. It is also a very unique kind of art style. It's a very limited color palette, as you can see, but it's very, very unique as well, because, for example, the latest edition of the Honasa House has got similar color palette but different tint. So I really invite you to visit her Instagram page, because she always posts and updates. I don't know whether she's coming out with another edition. She said a couple of times that the latest edition was the last one, but I'm not entirely sure that that's going to be the case. She's also the creator of the Stunning Tarot, which I have as well, the 4th edition of the Stunning. I do, however, prefer this one much more. It's just so beautiful. And let me just find it, because when you want to find a very specific card that you want to show, for Murphy's Law, it's the last card you find. So I'm just gonna quickly go through all of them and see if I have missed it for whatever reason, but I don't think I have. So it's so beautiful. As you can see, it's a very botanical or botanics based deck. It's got a lot of flowers. By the way, I know from a post that the guidebook for the Honasa House, a list of majors, is available, I think. Or at least some kind of indication of what flowers these are, and a kind of a keywords connected or related to them. I am apologizing that I don't know more about it, but to be honest, I didn't actually check before I was filming, so I don't want to say something that is not correct. There you go. This is the most beautiful Emperor card in all of my decks in my collection, and I know that it's a huge call, because having 450 decks, obviously you have a lot of choice, but I stand by it. It's absolutely gorgeous because of the sense of decadence. This to me looks like it's an emperor that is a relic at the bottom of the sea, whether you see barnacle growing out of it and algae and stuff. And it talks about melancholia. It talks about a nostalgic sense of power that the emperor used to have. And it was, a portent. It was something incredibly larger than life, but now it's at the bottom of the sea. And it reminds me so much of many myths and legends, for example. So many memories, related to lots of stories that I've been reading. I really love this. I know that it's not, let's say, 100% the interpretation of the, let's say, the RWS meaning of the Emperor card, because the RWS symbology is about, the restoration of the order after the chaos, the authority, and so on. And this one doesn't really give you, it does give you a sense of power, but it's a decadent power. It's the power that used to be, you know, and it's not anymore. And it does have that dignity about it, and I just absolutely love it. So when it comes to, let's say, the product value, the cardstock is really excellent. You know, when you have such a large format, obviously it tends to, for the law of physics, it tends to be very flimsy, but this one is sturdy enough that it doesn't give you that feel to it. I already talked about the art style. I absolutely love it. I love the color palette. It's not edged, as you can see. I think none of our no, there is one edition, the 7th edition. The first print was actually edged. I don't have that, unfortunately. But this one isn't. And it comes with a tuck box, so it's not like it's, you know, it wasn't intended to be a collectible item. It wasn't printed with the intention to be a collectible item. Certainly didn't have the intention to sell for hundreds of dollars, but this one now, the latest one that I've seen on a Facebook group, sold for 450 Australian dollars. And that seems to be, you know, perhaps from 300 to 400 Australian dollars seems to be the price this sells for. Would I spend that much money? No, absolutely not. First of all, because I have the 7th edition, which is really beautiful. Of course, I love the jumbo size, but it is a lot of money for a deck that is periodically reprinted, even though in slightly different editions. It didn't come with a guidebook. Yes, I know I can download it now, but back then it didn't. It wasn't available. There's a number of things that would, you know, I would definitely not let myself be set back by $400. As I said, I only spent $50 US for both edition 3 and 6. So obviously that was a bargain, and that was simply because it was someone who loves tarot so much, and she has an incredible collection, and she was really happy that I was looking for this deck and I reached out to her. So she was very kind as to, you know, let me have this deck for such an affordable price. But again, I would not have bought it had she sold it for $300-400. It is an incredibly beautiful deck, but those are that's my honest opinion. So the next deck, it's a really gorgeous one. It's the Blood Moon Tarot by Sam Guai. Sam have made an announcement in their newsletter. I've subscribed to their newsletter, saying that there will be a reprint of the Blood Moon Tarot. However, unfortunately, they don't specify when, which is kind of keeping us really, you know, on the tip of our toes all the time, because we're just like, oh my god, we don't want to miss it. So this is the deluxe edition, because it comes in a wraparound magnetic closure box. This deck, oh my goodness, this deck is absolutely gorgeous. It's so beautiful. I just I don't have a lot of adjectives. It ticks all the boxes. Personally, I really love the cardstock. So it's the kind of really soft and silky, papery, cardboardy, almost kind of cardstock, which is also very sturdy. Now, this is what I like to do to tell everyone how much I love it, and the reason why I love the tactile experience of this deck is when I do this. So when you do this and you hear that kind of papery noise, it means that it's an excellent quality. It's very similar to the Amber and Aura Tarot. If you have it, for example, you will know what I mean. And it's just really, really high quality. Now, it comes with this kind of gilding, which is also really high end. However, this deck is, let's say, has been used a lot. A couple of years ago, as soon as I got it, I used it almost every day because I was literally obsessed by it. So the gilding, even though I have been using it a lot, has chipped, but not a lot, not too much. So it doesn't really show that much of chipping. So this deck, I just love everything about it. The guidebook, especially the one with the larger coffee table book with the hardcover, is one of the most beautiful tarot-related companion book that I've ever seen. The art style is so beautiful that I've actually considered more than once buying larger prints of some of these cards. It's just that every time that I you know, decide on which card. I log into their website, and unfortunately that specific one is sold out. It is symbolic. It's it's also very intuitive, but it does have that kind of oniric sense to it. So oniric related to dream. It does make you feel like you enter a liminal space of dreams and trance. And it reminds me a lot, in specific, there's a few cards that, like this one for example, remind me a lot of the movie Pan's Labyrinth by Guillermo del Toro, which is a very famous Mexican movie director and genius, if I may say. So it is that kind of beauty. It's a beauty that transcends whatever it is that is pertaining to humanity. The figures here do not feel like humans, they transcend the world, and they're just immortalized in these really beautiful settings. Sometimes it is seen as a very busy deck because of the artwork, and I know a lot of people that say they have problems with the eyes. So there's a lot of eyes, actual, you know, eyes, depicted in this deck. Obviously, if you have an issue with that, there's actually a name for it, but I forgot what it's called. If you have a phobia for eyes, that could be a bit of a trigger. So obviously this deck would not be for you. However, if you don't, this deck is amazing, and it will take you to a whole new dimension of, you know, bonding with your tarot, because it's absolutely fantastic. It's a sharpshooter. It reads really, really well. Now, this deck, I bought it when it was still available, and I paid the recommended retail price, which I believe at the time was $150 for the deluxe edition. So it wasn't a cheap deck to begin with, but it is the deluxe edition. I think that the other edition, which came, I believe, in a top box, only sold for I think 80 Australian dollars. Again, sorry, I apologize, I'm not entirely sure. I do know, however, that now this deck, because it's out of print, and before Sam announced that they were going to reprint it, or perhaps come out with a new edition, I'm not entirely sure. But before there was that announcement, I sold this one selling for 350 Australian dollars. Which is a lot of money for a deck, obviously. As you notice, we started from the highest price point, and we're slowly going into the couple of $100s, which is, to be honest, is still a lot of money for a deck of cards, obviously. Now, what I believe is that this deck is unique in the sense that it gives you that sense, as I said, of trance. So you're connecting with the actual essence of the deck itself. That's the spirit of the deck. I have had a few experiences with other tarot decks that put me in that kind of state of communication with the deck, so I am very grateful for it. I would definitely buy the new edition, whatever it is, if it's new edition or second print or whatever. I would definitely buy it. I don't think I would, let's say I wouldn't pay $350 for it, Australian, but I would definitely pay whatever the artist is asking for it, because I strongly believe that I love this deck so much. It is making me a better reader, it's making me a better collector. It's also one of my most cherished decks in my collection, and it's one of those decks you don't mind probably spending a little bit more to acquire a copy because of these reasons. And by the way, these are the backs, just in case I haven't shown you. Now the next deck is the second edition, the first edition of which sells for like 1,500 Australian dollars, and I kid you not, I've actually seen it selling for listed for 1,500, agreed on and sold for 1,200 Australian dollars, but not the second edition. So I have the second edition. This is the very famous Tildwick Tarot. There are, to this day, 3 editions of this deck. I think that the second and the third edition are very much similar. However, there is a substantial difference in the contrast of the card, of the artwork, between the first and the second edition. Now, it comes with a 2-part box with a thumbprint cutout. It's not accompanied by any book. However, I do have a it's not a companion book, it's an article that has been published by a person that has been studying this deck. Unfortunately, I cannot say the name of the person simply because I do not know. So what happened was that I got a copy. I got in possession of a copy of this guidebook, which is, by the way, incredibly detailed and fantastic if you have this deck. Reach out to me because it's a PDF. So what happened was that I knew someone in the tarot community that had acquired a copy of this companion book from someone who had acquired it directly from the person who wrote it. This person didn't know the person who wrote it either. So when I reached out to this person to acquire the companion book, and I asked who it was that had done such a fantastic job in studying the cards and explaining them, they didn't know. And then what happened was that they changed their name on Facebook. So every time that and probably they deleted their account, because every time that I go back to the conversation in my messages app, I find it says Facebook user. And so I honestly, there's no other way. I actually put an announcement in one of the groups like a year and a half ago saying, I have this companion book, if anyone wants it, I'm just gonna give it out, because I believe the person who wrote it, would have wanted everyone to read it. It's not signed. So this deck has been created by Neil Lovell, who unfortunately, as you can see, passed out in 2018. But it has been reprinted by his brother as an act of love towards Neil. Now, I have reached out to the brother, or at least maybe the social media manager, from the Tealwick, let's say, website. They also have Lenormand decks and other decks. And I never got an answer. Probably, I don't know, I didn't follow up, but to be honest, I reached out trying to understand if they knew that there was this person who had done this study on the deck, because I'm pretty sure that we want to know that there is someone who loves this deck so much that they've done such a research work and are accurate as such, on the deck. In any case, this is a really beautiful deck. Now, the second edition, as I said, it's slightly different. The gilding, first of all, is this copper color as opposed to the gold gilding of the first edition. But the main difference between the two editions is the contrast of the images in the two decks. I have never seen the first edition, but from what I understand, the contrast is a lot stronger, and so you actually really see the cards a lot better and the elements in the cards. I have to say this one is at times a bit blurry because there is not much contrast. I know that through the camera, for some reason, probably because I'm using a JPEG a MoviePeg format recording, it's already sharpened, and there's already a tweaking of the definition, so you probably see the subjects on the cards very clearly. I can assure you that in real life, it is justified to have a price point difference between the first and the second edition. In order to be able to justify such an enormous price point difference, then I don't know. So the first one sells for, as I said, $1,200. The second edition, I actually paid $150 for it, Australian. I don't know if the first one is actually so much better than this one. I love this one, it's fantastic. The cardstock is phenomenal. It's again one of those really sturdy, probably even thicker cardstock that has got that silky kind of paper feel to it. Fans out like a charm, shuffles really well, reads, it's a very sharp shooter, but it's also one of those decks that you need to have a little more of a knowledge of the RWI system, because it doesn't have, as you can see, it's all based on a mansion and the rooms of the mansion and the gardens outside, so it doesn't necessarily help you with recognizing the elements, the symbols in the card. Of course, when you know the system, then you'll be able to read what card this is. So the Six of Staves, and when there is one of the traditional symbols, you'll be able to recognize it immediately because you know it by heart. Now, honestly, $150 for this deck, yes, absolutely. I think it's worth it. And to be honest with you, I think that it was the price point of the third edition when they printed it out. So you know, 150 is absolutely fine for an indie deck of this product value. $1,200, would I buy it if I had the possibility? No. I wouldn't spend $1,200 on it, even though everyone keeps on saying that the first edition is so much better. I still have the second one, so I wouldn't spend that much money on it. I'm actually curious to know if you have the first edition. Just drop me a line in the comments below and let me know, because there might be something that I'm missing. Is it the contrast and the gilding, or is there something else? Are the images different? That's what I'm curious about. So let's have a look at the last, I think I have 3 decks left. So the next deck is actually a very special deck for me. It's an Italian deck. It used to be published mass market by Ital Cards. And it's a very famous deck because the designer and the creator, let's say also of the text, so of the guidebook, is Amerigo Folchi. And Amerigo Folchi, together with Osvaldo Menegazzi, is probably one of the 2 most popular, most famous and recognizable master of tarot in Italy. Now, this deck is the Tarocco di Colombo, so the Columbus's tarot. And as I said, it was a limited and numbered, is it, edition? Yes, it's a limited and numbered edition. This is number 2009 out of 3,000 copies. There's a few of these decks that have been produced by Ital Cards, and as a matter of fact, I think that you know, in a couple of weeks I'll be going to Italy, so I'm actually gonna hit a couple of shops that I know, antiquarian shops that I know have Amerigo Folchi's tarot decks in store, because I know there's a few other decks that I would really love to have. So this deck, also very difficult to quote, because to be honest with you, there seems to be some kind of really odd phenomenon in Italy. So there's a lot of people who are collectors and have been collectors like me for decades. And what happens is that because they only sell within Europe, or even in many cases within Italy, you don't have the price gauging that you may see in other countries, or whether you sell cross-continent, for example. And because of that reason, if you look for this deck, and another one in particular that I just wanted to mention, which is this one, the Universal Tarot by Sergio Toppi. This is the mini edition. By Los Scarabäus, a special edition. Now, what happened is that those particular decks, when you find them on eBay Italy, you would pay probably 100 euros for it. As a matter of fact, I know that this one has been selling for 125 euros. So not being an out of print, very sought after, very hard to find deck is not that much. This one sold for about 70 euros, which is, you know, it's a lot of money for a mini deck which only has major arcanas, but it is incredibly sought after. However, if you look into eBay US, you will see especially this one selling for $300 US. So again, it doesn't mean that it's going to sell for that price, but that is the starting, you know, the starting price for it. Now this deck is, so it's all based about the, you know, Columbus and the adventures of Columbus the Explorer, and it's a really beautiful deck. Now Ital Cards really went all out when it comes to quality. The cardstock is phenomenal. We do have Fabriano. Fabriano is a very popular paper products producer in the center of Italy. And I have to say, this cardstock is fantastic. It's sturdy but very silky at the touch as well. It's matte, doesn't catch us the light. It's just incredibly beautiful. But even though it's a matte finish, I can assure you, and you can probably tell by the cards, I can assure you that the brilliance of the colors is phenomenal. This is the only deck that I have with the matte finish that whose colors actually look as if they were printed on a gloss finish. It's absolutely superb. Obviously you may like the tarot or not, and to be honest with you, this is not exactly my aesthetics. But regardless of that, this is definitely a collectible item, and I'm quite happy that I got it. It is rather peepish when it comes to the minors. Not peep entirely, not a Marseille style of peeps, but it's peepish, as in they're not fully scenic or fully illustrated. it's a beautiful deck. I really, really like it. I like looking at it. It's, you know, regardless of, obviously, regardless of the theme, when you're a collector, in many, many cases, you will find yourself collecting items that, you know, not really caring about the theme. For example, the Baroque Bohemian Cat Tarot, yes, it's a cat themed deck, and I just so happen to love animals. It wasn't the fact that I am an animal lover that, you know, pushed me or convinced me to purchase that deck. It's just, I would have bought it anyway because it's a collectible item. So sometimes we're not really paying attention to what the theme of a deck is, or the fact that in this case, for example, is a bit peepish. Now this one, to be honest with you, I am actually considering buying, so I've already contacted a person who has another deck by Amerigo Folchi, also by Italcart, and we're kind of negotiating on the price, and I cannot possibly tell you, I cannot tell you now what price I will settle in because I don't know. I need to see the deck, and I'm going to Italy also, to do that. I mean, I have to go to Italy, and I would take advantage of the fact that I'm there. But this is definitely, to me, it's a typical collectible items. I will be probably also happy to spend a little bit more for. However, we're definitely not looking at hundreds of dollars like we've seen for the other decks. So this is probably, I will be happy to pay, you know, for the additional deck that I'm looking into, I'll be happy to pay exactly the same price, so 125 euros or more or less. Now, I think I have got, because I showed you the Tarot Universale, then I'm just going to show you the cards as well. And we're actually kind of done, although I do have a couple of honorable mentions. So the Universal Tarot by Sergio Toppi. Sergio Toppi is also the author of the Primordial Tarot, which is actually a mass market deck by Lo Scarabeo, and is still in print. And it's the full 78 tarot cards that actually was based on the Tarot of the Origins, which was from the 90s, and now it's out of print, hard to find, very expensive, really breaks my heart because it's so beautiful. And that's another deck that I found someone who's selling it on eBay, Italy. So I'm definitely gonna get in touch with them and see whether we can wiggle, you know, we can agree on a lower price because they're asking for a lot of money for it. However, this deck is really tiny, and I mean really tiny. Obviously, if we take the previous deck just to show you, we're looking at a very small deck, but it is an amazing deck. I love Sergio Toppi art style, it's fantastic. And I think that because this has got that kind of 70s vibe to it and colors that I really, really like. And I don't know, I just, I got it from eBay Italy as well a couple of years ago when I was there. And I think, how much did I spend for it? I honestly don't recall, but it wasn't an exorbitant amount of money. It must have been something around 70 euros, as I said. But it's so beautiful. I can't have it. It's just, I wish it were full size because obviously I would be able to see the artwork a little bit better. But I'm so very happy that I have this. And so, yeah, the Tarot of the Origins is the one that I'm actually trying to negotiate, about, because I really, really like Sergio Toppi's art style. Now, if I remember correctly, I'm actually done with the out of print decks, but what I wanted to show you is a couple of decks that are still in print, but they are quite expensive, and I just want to give you my honest opinion on them. So this is the Tarot, so Tarro Escola, this is the name of the creator. I'm sorry I cannot pronounce her name, but you can see it's spelled this way. This is actually produced and sold by Folger Press in the UK. I paid a lot of money for it. I think overall it was 180 Australian dollars because obviously I had to pay for the shipping as well from the UK to Australia. It is a large deck, very, very large deck, as you can see. Doesn't even fit on top of my hand. And as a matter of fact, this deck has been conceived by the creator as a meditation tool. So it's not necessarily used as for divination purposes. And you wouldn't be able to, because imagine doing a Celtic cross with this one. I mean, you would need an entire table. And most of the time you need a lot of room for larger spreads. You wouldn't be able to use larger spreads with this. And as you can see, this is color. There's a lot of color. The creator has specifically said that they were looking at some nebulas in the outer space, and they were looking at the birth of stars, and she was recalled of the design of these cards. And so she was confirmed of their conviction of the cosmographic function of these cards. That's in the guidebook. Now this one is, let's say, product-wise, the value is, let's say it's a good price point for what you get. And as I was saying before, when you have a larger deck like this one, it tends to be a bit flimsy, but this cardstock is actually really good, very sturdy. So, you know, it feels like you can actually use it, even though I wouldn't even know how to start shuffling this. In any case, I don't know. I mean, and this time I'm actually asking you, because this deck is not expensive because it's out of print and hard to find. And, you know, all of the things that make a collectible item go up in price because of, you know, availability and everything. Sourcing, and the fact that perhaps you find an item but it's far away, you have to pay for shipping, you have to pay for insurance, you have to pay taxes. There's a number of things that, you know, justify certain out of print, hard to find decks to go really high in price. However, this one is, as I said, still in print. So, regardless of the art style, I guess my question is, would you spend, you know, this much money? So 180, say, Australian dollars, which is about, let me think, it's about 115 US dollars for a deck like this. I'm actually thinking about it because I'm not entirely sure. I don't know if this is appealing to me as a reader or as a collector. It's definitely more of a collectible item than anything else that I've got, simply because it is not even indicated, you know, for divination purposes, but more for meditation. But I don't know, I'm not entirely sure, and that's why I didn't include it in the top 10, because I really didn't know whether you know, whether I would actually buy it again. I bought it in a spur of the moment. I'm not regretting it, but I'm you know, sometimes I'm confused and I haven't decided, you know, yet. It is a very interesting deck though. So I'm asking you, what would you do? Would you spend this? Do you have this deck? Are you happy about your purchase? Would you buy it again if you had the possibility and if you didn't have the deck? And the last deck I want to talk about is the deck that, if you're familiar with my videos, if you watch them, this will be a very known deck. This is the Mio Eames Tarot, Vonsors, New York. This is a deck that has been illustrated, created by a South Korean tattoo artist. She travels the world and you know, stays at different tarot studios in order to be able to perform her profession. So she's not a tarot reader by profession, not an illustrator by profession, even though, you know, she's an artist because she's a tattoo artist. Now this deck is still in print. You can find it on a US website, and there's two versions of this deck, and the full 78 card, so not just the major arcana but the full tarot deck, actually sells for 120 US dollars plus shipping. I didn't spend that much money. I bought it secondhand, but it was pristine from someone in Australia, so I also didn't have to spend that much money on shipping and insurance and taxes. This has got a very large size, and as in it's slightly wider than a standard size, but it's a lot taller. And it's a sort of, yeah, it's a linen. This one feels to me like it's an embossed linen, front and back. I have to say it's not as thick as you would want it to be because of the size, but it's still very usable, very manageable. What I love about this deck is the actual meaning of the cards. Although there is no official guidebook, the creator specifically wants you to use your intuition in order to find your way through the cards. Now, there are a couple of cards that are absolutely mind-blowing when it comes to the meaning and the way in which the meaning has been depicted in the cards. And one of them is the Lover card. As you can see, it's showing you two persons bonded by this string. And of course, you can see one person's hand is covered in flesh and skin. So obviously we assume this person is alive. And the other person's hand is actually just bones. So we assume that this person is not alive anymore. The fact that the string is still attached and not broken, it's absolutely mind-blowing. Introducing the concept of a love that is so strong that it actually goes beyond life is not just mind-blowing, it's actually very moving, it's very touching, it's an incredibly powerful concept. I have lost a lot of people that I loved, and the fact that I still feel attached to them, I'm gonna be honest with you, has been a bit of a... So obviously I felt really sad about losing them like everyone else would. But what happens is that I'm very much an empath, and when it comes to feelings, I have to be careful not to be overwhelmed by other people's feelings. When I have my own, they're even more overpowering. So I need to find that kind of grounding, I need to find that kind of protection of the heart and a kind of a balance whenever I experience this kind of moments of sadness. But this is, to me, a symbol of hope. And let me explain, because I know that it might be a little bit controversial, and I just want to make sure that everyone understands what I mean with that. There's only a few countries in the world, very few actually checked, and I don't want to name them because it's kind of a negative thing. There are only a few countries in the world where you are still attached either by religion or by law. I'm not going to specify that, to the person you were married to, even after this person has passed away. Very few, which means that the majority actually tells you that you're not, let's say, bonded to this person anymore. You can go on and find someone else. If it's a romantic relationship, you can find another romantic relationship, get married and everything. It's not illegal, it's not frowned upon, it is accepted. And also from a religious point of view, there's no strings, literally strings attached. Now, that to me is very painful, because it almost feels as if it were pushing people to move on. Sometimes, and I talk to you from two different points of view. One, as an empath myself, I have difficulties sometimes moving on from letting go of someone who's passed. But I was, fortunate enough that I only lose my parents, for example, and one really, really close friend of mine, which I guess, it happens in life. The older you get, unfortunately, you lose people. There's no two ways around that. However, I had this feeling that society nowadays pushes you so much to lose someone, to move on after you lose someone, that it puts you in a very painful situation. I believe that as a person who does a lot of healing, grief processing with my clients in my private practice, I see a lot of people that feel guilty of letting go. They feel guilty either way. They feel guilty of letting go, and they feel guilty when they're not letting go. I believe that there is this kind of a stigma in nowadays society, in specific in a few countries, where grief is not well processed. We are asked to push ahead regardless of what we feel. We've been told that we're being childish, we're being selfish, we've been told pretty much everything. Whether we choose one way or another, whether we choose to move on, we're selfish. If we don't choose to move on, we're also selfish because you should let them go. I feel that nowadays there is no respect, or not enough respect or consideration for someone who's going through a mourning period. There is no manual 101 on grief, okay? it really is subjective. It really depends on how much, how much it hurts. And you need to process that, because otherwise you'll never feel whole again, and perhaps you're not meant to. So, having said that, the idea that it's immortalizing this lover card, that you can still be attached to someone even beyond, life, it's absolutely mind-blowing for me. And there's also another card which I'm worried that I'm actually missed it, but it's the Three of Cups. Okay, I found it. So it's the Three of Cups, as I was saying. So you can clearly see these two people. You can assume safely that they're both alive, but obviously we have this person that is not alive anymore. And yet this skeleton hand is supporting them in such a tender way. It looks almost as if it was just caressing the fingers of the two. And it's such an amazing concept that, this is the Three of Cups. It's supposed to be the growth in the suit of feelings, in the suit of emotions, in the suit of cups. So you're supposed to, when you look at the Three of Cups, one way you're looking at it is the friendship. So you have three friends celebrating, toasting, for example. In many other cases, it can be seen as the card of, a family, as in having a child. Out of the couple of the two, you're growing into a family of three. But in this case, I think is really relating back to this concept. So this concept is even more mind-blowing for me, because not only it tells you that it's okay to still be in pain for your loss, to still be mourning your loss, to still feel the grief and the sadness and crying about your loss, even years after your loss has occurred. It's still okay, but that doesn't preclude you from living your life. It's a way to accept and process grief that I myself use in my, grief and trauma processing practice. Because I strongly believe that this is the correct way to look at it. If this was a romantic relationship, you can still honor the person you were bonded to, even after they passed away. It can still be unique for you. It can still be, or he, she, they can still be the love of your life, but you can still have another relationship with someone else, and it's probably gonna be on a different level, not necessarily less powerful at all, and it can still be blessed by the person who's not there anymore. This is a really mind-blowing concept for me that makes me emotional every time I talk about it. And it brings me to this concept. So would I pay $120 plus shipping to Australia again to get a hold of this deck? Yes, a million times yes. Because this deck, just for these two cards, it actually gives me the possibility to do so much work on my life, myself, my inner self, that no other deck has given me the possibility to do. And because of that, I am so very grateful that $120, then so be it. So be it. I mean, oh my goodness, I wish I had to spend only 100. How much money do we spend in therapy? Seriously, in Australia, therapy costs $450 for 50 minutes. $450 Australian for 50 minutes of therapy. And this is 120 US, which is about 190 Australian, 185 Australian. Well, I would take this deck over therapy, especially, I'm not going to say anything anymore, but I had atrocious experiences with the therapists here in Australia, so I'm not going to say anything anymore. Of course, there's fantastic, doctors around the world, but I would still really consider this deck, and the way in which it makes you work. It makes all of your intuition at work. It's just absolutely fantastic. So that was it for today. I do have other decks that I am just mentioning. For example, I had the original edition of the Solar Occulto, but now there's been a reprint recently, so obviously that's gone down in value. I also have the Madame Lydia Wilhelmina Tarot of the Macabre and Autumn Scene. I think the correct name is, everyone calls it the Madame Lydia Tarot. That one goes up and down in prices because it just sometimes the creator was unfortunately not well. They post the remaining decks that they have in their stock. Then, for example, the Slow Tarot has just been reprinted. The Darkness of Light used to be very expensive. Now, every now and then you can find new copies. It's been reprinted, so the price goes down. Other decks that, it just so happens that they go out of print, and then for 10-15 years you don't hear about them. They go up in price and then they go down because they've been either being picked up mass market or they've been reprinted. But I want to just stretch the fact that this was a very honest and open opinion that I gave you about these decks. I mean, after all, because they are in my collection, it means that I love them. And I'll be very curious to hear what you think about them. If you have other really expensive decks, like I know, for example, that there's a triad like the Slow Hala, for example, which is selling in Australia for around 12 to 1300 Australian dollars. I know of the Delta Enduring, which is on my wish list for sure, because I absolutely would love to have that deck. And it's sold in Australia for 650 Australian dollars the last time I saw it. And the Collective Tarot, which sold for 850 Australian. I don't have those decks. I am definitely interested in the Delta Enduring, but I also know that there's a very similar deck coming up from La Panthère Studio, the same creator as the Southern Gothic and the Southern Botanic Oracle. So they're coming out with a tarot deck as well. So I'm very curious to hear your opinion, but for now, have a great day.